Alright, so as many of you have already heard, there's an intelligence specialization revamp that goes live on March 17th for PC, and I thought I would talk about it a little bit from a PvP perspective and kind of point out some things. So the first one, the gather intel for full Intel spec ships. This line right here, players have a 30-second lockout for the gather intel debuff as opposed to the 15 seconds it was before. A long time ago, it was pretty popular to use a ship like the Fate Intel Warbird because it had a lance that put the target ship instantly into a vulnerable state, and then you could strip the engineering debuffs or whatever. So now you have to wait 30 seconds instead of 15 seconds. That's fine. Honestly, it doesn't matter. This isn't something that gets used very much in PvP anyway, at least at the high end of PvP. You're not targeting anybody for an extended amount of time to be able to get those stacks anyway, so this really doesn't matter. Evade target lock. This is something I've used before. The untargetable duration is longer, and it scales with control, but also subject to control the affected foe. So I guess we'll have to kind of see how this lands. If it's 4 seconds and it can be increased with control expertise, or is it 4 seconds the maximum? And then, you know, control resistance of your target ship. I mean, most PvP builds are running a, pretty good amount of control. So I don't think this is going to matter. And this is the big one, Intel Team. This is always an issue. And I'm just glad to see, PvP scenarios mentioned. We do PvP in this game. There are a lot of people that PvP in this game. We're just kind of a secluded community compared to the other groups in this game. Now this one, currently Intel Team 3 provides 4,680 stealth. So this means that Intel Teams 1 and 2 will also provide this amount of stealth. I actually think that is a good thing, and before this patch goes live, I'll record some examples, but basically Intel Team 1, it's 100 less stealth, each team lower. So Intel Team 1 is 4480, 2 is 4580, and 3 is 4680. Intel Team 1 by itself is essentially worthless. You might as well not even activate it. 4480 is such a low amount of stealth that it doesn't matter. Other ships can target you no matter what. So now this opens up a lot of builds that previously might have struggled to do a PvP build. It makes them more viable. I mean, just for example, I opened all the ships that were Intel pilot. The Mars pilot escort, for example, right? It has a lieutenant Intel seat, which means it can only use Intel Teams 1 or 2. So previously, this ship was directly inferior to the Deimos, because the Deimos can slot Intel Team 3. I still think the Deimos is a tiny bit better than the Mars, but it does make this ship a lot more viable, because now you could use Intel Team 1 and be, just as effective stealth-wise as Intel Team 3. So I don't hate that. I like more variation. I mean, look at all these ships that I opened up that you can build a Intel PvP build on now. That you're no longer restricted to looking for ships with a Lieutenant Commander Intel seat. The defense buff increase, that's fine. Intel Team 3 at an extra 50 defense. I think that's probably not the worst idea, because there's so much accuracy. An extra 50 defense still is not crazy overpowered, and it'll help players, kind of like newer to PvP. If they slap Intel Team 1, 2, or 3 onto their build, they can stay alive a little bit longer, maybe learn a little bit more and have some more fun. And my goal with PvP is accessibility. I want more people to be able to do it. So, I think that these two changes, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with these changes. And if anything, it helps, new players. And then the last one, perception buff. And to recipient, that's a key piece here. That means if someone on your team gives you Intel Team, because you can cast Intel Team on a teammate, then whoever that is gets perception, even if you use it on yourself or if you use it on a teammate. And I like that. I think that's a good idea. I don't know how much perception buff this will be, so I'll wait with bated breath to see what the actual numbers are here, but another way to increase perception against ships using targeting stealth, I think, is a good idea. Now, the problem with this whole thing is that intel does not exist in a void, right? What this essentially does is the list of abilities that increase perception, like emergency power to aux, or the jem'hadar deflector, or things like that that can be used on any ship, did not get a buff with this, but ships that have intel did. So the problem with Intel Team and Exitus adding additional stealth is not just Intel Team and Exitus. I think a lot of people don't understand what's happening when they encounter a ship like this, but those two things in combination are beatable. You can build a high enough perception ship to target someone using Intel Team 3 and Exitus, and you just have to make some slight adjustments to your build. Maybe you add the deflector, tachyon grid console, Intel is your secondary spec. There's a bunch of different ways. It's not too difficult. The problem is that the single largest buff to stealth is a ship that uses Attack Pattern Lambda as well. Because Lambda, at any rank, even rank 1, right, it's 625 perception being taken away from your enemy. You're essentially able to get, if you build up this amount of stealth and add Lambda to it, then you're effectively at over 6,000 stealth. And it's just straight up not possible to counter this on a ship that either doesn't have pilot, as it stands right now, or intel after this change. So if anything, this makes it easier to target those types of ships, because ships with intel and pilot, like all the ones at the top here, suddenly now have the ability to get their perception even higher. So that's my problem with this whole situation with Intelligence Team. It does not affect my high-end PvP builds at all. The high-end PvP situation will be mostly the same. We might just see a couple of different ships here and there, but the counters for Intel Team are the same. The ships we use are the same. We were already using Intel ships a lot. So this has no effect whatsoever at high-end PvP. What it does do is it makes it so that tactical and engineering captains in ships that don't have pilot seat or intel seat, it gives them 0 ability to counter Intelligence Team plus Lambda. And, this isn't new. This has been a problem for a long time, but I was hoping that by revamping the Intel spec, they would make some changes in the interest of making PvP more accessible. And I think they halfway tried that with these two changes. The idea was that you could give players with Intel ships some way to compete and stay alive longer. And I think the idea behind adding more stealth to Intel Team and increasing the defense buff here is that players who are newer to PvP can stay alive longer and therefore learn, like, oh, I should have activated this ability at that time, or, oh, I should have added more heals to cover the time when my Intel Team is not active, or whatever. And that stuff, it's hard to learn, and that's why I've been trying to provide some more resources. There's one solution to this whole thing, and it's really simple. Attack Pattern Lambda, they should remove this perception debuff, because then Intel Team is annoying. Intel Team plus Exitus is more annoying, but even non-science captains in non-pilot ships still have a counter to this by slotting tachyon detection grid, or emergency power to aux, or jem'hadar deflector, or all 3. But as it stands right now, if you're fighting someone that is using Intel Team and Lambda, they are untargetable to any captain that is not a Psi captain. In a team setting, when we PvP in teams, when we do 5v5s, most of us are science captains. And if the other team is using Intel Team, Exitus, Lambda, etc., we usually have a build that's specifically designed to counter it, that opens them up. So in a team situation, these changes don't matter either. As a team, you're still able to overcome Intel Team users. The problem, again, talking about accessibility for PvP, is a lot of people who send me messages and talk to me, their experience with PvP is usually just like a really basic 1v1 with someone in their fleet or their friend. And in a 1v1 scenario, if someone is using all of the things that increase stealth, it's totally unbeatable, which is dumb, to be frank. So, you know, I don't hate this whole change. I like these changes overall. All of these. And I know a pilot revamp might be maybe the next thing that they work on, because, you know, Intel was like the first spec, so it's like the original specialization. But even though pilot might be up for a revamp, these changes to Intel Team, it's the perfect time to also fix this perception debuff from Lambda. And speaking of other things to fix, and I'll jump in game here really quick. Just want to show something. The bridge officers that have pirate, right? It says bonus damage and perception. This is a leftover from the old skill tree. It used to be that perception and stealth were part of the same tree, but after the skill revamp, pirate buffs, they add 150 stealth, and this stacks with Intel Team. It does not add any perception. If pirates actually added perception, then it would make a lot of sense. You know, I would, you know, an extra, if I could stack 3 of them, 450 perception, that would be great. That would be fine. That's, you know, almost a counter to Lambda. Not quite. 450 is still a lot less than 625. Okay, I'm just going to run through the other ones here really quick. Subspace Beacon, I barely even read this one. You know, the only time that I ever see this used in PvP is it actually breaks, or it used to, I haven't tested it in a while, but Parasitic Ice. If you get iced and you drop Subspace Beacon, it actually breaks the ice so you can get out. So that's cool. None of these changes really affect that part of it, so. EMP Probe, faster flight speed, and it lingers for a full 10 seconds. I love that, actually. This is an ability that I used anyway. It was already labeled as a control ability for unconventional systems, but working with secondary deflectors, that'll be interesting. But having it scale with control and damage scaling with particle generators, these are good changes. Good job, well done. Ionic Turbulence, same thing, right? It flies faster, more damage resistance debuff, scales with aux power, scales with control expertise, interacts as a control ability and secondary deflectors, and this bug. This used to drive me insane. If you use rank 2 or rank 3, when you fired it on a target, the cloud would apply to you instead of your target. It always drove me crazy. So like, good job again. This is perfect. This is exactly the kind of fix that we needed for this. Kinetic Magnet, I know there's some discussion about this for PvE just because of the kinetic debuff, you know, that potentially could make some Torp builds do more damage or something, you know, maybe you could squeeze onto a nanny of some type or something like that. And Surgical Strikes, I think these are good. I think this will really help out players that are kind of at the beginning part of the game. Maybe you got their first Intel ship, because this will increase the damage of Surgical Strikes substantially. And for players, you know, that maybe don't have a ton of crit chance or crit severity, this will add a lot of damage to their builds, and I really like that. It's a good change, actually the kind of change that I want to see. You know, I'd like to see the high end kind of stay flat, and I'd like to see the low end of the game come up closer. You know, I'd like to squeeze things together a little bit, make the competition a little more fair across the board, both in PvE and PvP. So, Transport Warhead, another well done change here. No firing arc requirement, so you can put a torpedo in the rear and still have it hit in the front. You know, I see that they say it could benefit from a little more review, and I understand this. This is fine. These changes alone will make it a lot better, and then as time goes on and people test this and experiment with it more, they'll probably get better feedback for this, you know, for whatever other changes they want to do to it. But I mean, just these two things alone, it's a great step in the right direction. It's like 90% of the way there.